The press conference was supposed to be a routine event. Katherine Leavitt, the newly appointed Secretary of State, stood tall at the podium, her gaze unwavering as the cameras flashed and the murmurs of reporters filled the room. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another policy briefing. The administration had been under relentless attack from liberal media outlets, and today, one of their most notorious journalists was in attendance. Seated in the front row, leaning forward with a smug expression, was Nathan Caldwell, a well-known left-wing journalist infamous for his aggressive questioning. His tie was slightly loosened, his sleeves rolled up. He carried himself like a man who had already decided the narrative before the press conference had even begun. Katherine took a deep breath. She had faced tough questions before, but something about Caldwell's presence felt different. The moment she called for the first question, his hand shot up. "Madam Secretary," Caldwell began, his voice dripping with condescension, "the current administration has been accused of funneling billions into outdated military projects while cutting funding for social programs. How do you justify these reckless priorities when millions of Americans are struggling to afford health care?" A murmur spread through the room. It was a loaded question, crafted not to seek truth, but to create outrage. Katherine's jaw tightened slightly, but her expression remained composed. "We are investing in national security," she replied calmly. "The safety of this country ensures the freedoms and opportunities that allow Americans to thrive. Without it, everything else collapses." Caldwell smirked, shaking his head. "Right, national security. So just to be clear, you believe that tanks are more important than teachers? Miss Leavitt, isn't that just another way of saying that you prioritize war over working families?" The room tensed. Some journalists whispered among themselves, others watched in silence, waiting to see how she would respond. Katherine exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a question, it was a trap. And she knew it. Katherine Leavitt tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on Caldwell, measuring his words carefully. The room had gone eerily quiet. Everyone knew this was no longer just a press briefing. It was turning into a full-blown confrontation between two ideological titans. "I think it's fascinating," Katherine began, her voice calm but sharp as a blade, "how you frame the conversation. You assume that investing in national defense means abandoning American families. That's an incredibly dishonest way to present the issue." Caldwell chuckled, shaking his head like he had expected this answer. "Madam Secretary, we're talking about billions in funding that could go to public health care, education, infrastructure, things that actually help Americans live better lives. But instead, the government is throwing that money at weapons and wars." Katherine leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Caldwell, let me ask you a question." The room stirred. It wasn't often that a government official challenged a journalist directly. Caldwell smirked, gesturing for her to continue. "By all means." "Let's say, for a moment, that we slash military funding," Katherine said, her tone precise. "The world doesn't suddenly become peaceful just because you wish it so. Threats don't disappear because a journalist in a comfortable studio declares that they should." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Caldwell's smirk faltered for a split second. "You speak about government spending like you're an economist," he shot back. "But let's talk about real numbers. Why is this administration okay with funneling taxpayer money into corporate bailouts while millions of families can barely afford a doctor's visit?" The trap was set. Caldwell had steered the debate straight into the economic battlefield, expecting Katherine to struggle. But she didn't flinch. "The government does not create wealth, Mr. Caldwell," she replied smoothly. "It can only redistribute it. And when you tax businesses into oblivion, guess what happens? Jobs disappear. The same Americans you claim to care about lose their paychecks, their homes, their futures." Caldwell crossed his arms. "So, you're saying that corporations should get tax breaks while hardworking families drown in medical debt? That's the administration's vision for America?" Katherine's lips curled into a knowing smile. I'm saying that an economy thrives when people have opportunity, not handouts. When businesses succeed, they hire workers. When they expand, communities grow. But when the government punishes success just to fund more bureaucratic red tape, it doesn't help the poor, it traps them in dependency. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some journalists whispered amongst themselves. Even a few camera operators exchanged glances. Caldwell, however, wasn't backing down. So what you're saying, he said slowly, is that if you can't afford to survive in America, it's your own fault? A silence fell over the room. Every lens, every microphone, every pair of eyes was fixed on Katherine. She exhaled slowly. The real fight had just begun. Katherine Leavitt met Caldwell's stare head-on. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent battleground where every word carried the weight of an entire ideology. "I never said that, Mr. Caldwell," she replied evenly. "But I will say this, success is not guaranteed, but opportunity is. This country offers anyone the ability to rise if they're willing to work for it." Caldwell scoffed. "That's a fantasy. Millions of Americans are trapped in poverty because of a system designed to keep the wealthy in power. It's easy to talk about opportunity when you come from privilege." Katherine's expression didn't change, but her voice sharpened. "Ah, the privilege argument. The easiest way to dismiss someone without actually debating their points." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Caldwell, were immigrants who fled war-torn countries privileged when they arrived here with nothing and built businesses?" Caldwell opened his mouth to respond, but Katherine wasn't done. "You act like America is some oppressive dystopia, but let me ask you something. If this country is so broken, why do millions risk everything to come here? Why do they leave socialist nations that promise free everything and run toward the very capitalism you despise?" The room erupted into murmurs. Some journalists exchanged uneasy glances, while others furiously jotted down notes. Caldwell's jaw tightened. He knew the immigration argument was a tough one to counter. "So what's your solution?" he snapped. "Just tell the struggling families out there to work harder while billionaires hoard wealth." Katherine shook her head. "No, but here's what I won't do. I won't lie to them. I won't sell them the myth that the government can solve all their problems. Because every time that's been tried, it's failed, miserably." Caldwell's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Ah yes, because universal health care is the end of freedom. Countries like Canada and the UK must be living in a totalitarian nightmare, right?" Katherine smirked. "Funny you bring that up. If their systems are so superior, why do thousands of their citizens cross the border every year to get treated in American hospitals?" A few gasps filled the room. Caldwell looked momentarily rattled. "You're cherry-picking data," he muttered. "And you're ignoring reality," Katherine shot back. "We don't have a perfect system, but we have the best system. One where innovation thrives, where the world's best doctors and researchers want to work. You don't fix a system by destroying it, Mr. Caldwell." The moderator, sensing the growing fire in the room, finally intervened. "Let's keep this civil," he warned. Katherine folded her arms. "I'm completely civil. I'm just done pretending that socialism isn't a failure every single time it's tried." Caldwell let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, I see. If you don't support unchecked capitalism, you're a socialist?" Katherine raised an eyebrow. "You idolize governments that seize wealth, dictate wages, and control industries. If that's not socialism, what is it?" The crowd was no longer just listening. They were invested. And Katherine knew this debate was far from over. Caldwell's face twitched as he struggled to regain control of the debate. He had come here expecting to corner Katherine Leavitt with loaded questions, but instead, he was the one on the defensive. He forced a laugh, shaking his head. "So now anyone who criticizes America should just get out? That's your argument?" Katherine's expression remained calm, but her eyes were locked onto him like a laser. "No, my argument is that if you hate this country, if you despise everything it stands for, and if you're actively working to tear it down, then maybe, just maybe, you should ask yourself why you're still here. The audience stirred. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked shocked that she had actually said it. Caldwell scoffed, gripping his microphone tighter. And what exactly does hating the country mean to you, Katherine? Not blindly worshiping the flag. Not agreeing with every decision a Republican president makes. Katherine's lips curled into a slight smile. She could see the desperation creeping into his voice. It means, she said, that if you believe the United States is fundamentally evil, irredeemable, and beyond saving, then you don't actually want to fix it. You want to burn it down. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Caldwell leaned in. Or maybe, he hissed, people like me just see the truth, that this country is built on racism, greed, and exploitation, and it needs a complete overhaul to ever be just. Katherine's smile vanished. And there it is, she said quietly. The truth. You don't want to improve America. You want to destroy it. Caldwell rolled his eyes. Oh, give me a break. Katherine's voice sharpened. No, you give America a break. It's not perfect. No country is. But the difference between patriots and radicals is that patriots fight to make it better. Radicals like you just want to tear it apart and pretend you're doing the world a favor. More applause. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Caldwell felt it. His frustration boiled over. So what's your solution, huh? He snapped. Force people to love the country? Make it illegal to criticize it. Katherine took a step forward. No, Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice clear, steady, unshaken. My solution is simple. If you don't love the U.S., get out of here. The room exploded. Some cheered. Others gasped. Journalists scrambled to take notes. Cameras zoomed in. Caldwell's face burned red with humiliation. He had tried to bait her into a meltdown. Instead, she had delivered the knockout punch, and now the entire country would hear it. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. If you don't love the U.S., get out of here. For a split second, there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that only comes when a room full of people have just witnessed something they know will go viral within hours. Then chaos erupted. Journalists scrambled to take notes, cameras zoomed in, and the murmurs among the audience turned into a full-blown frenzy. Some reporters in the back applauded, while others looked stunned, even horrified. Nathan Caldwell? He looked like he had just been slapped in the face. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like his brain was still trying to process what had just happened. You can't be serious, he finally stammered, gripping the microphone so tightly his knuckles turned white. You're really saying that people who criticize America should just leave? Katherine didn't blink. No, Mr. Caldwell, I'm saying that people who hate America, who think it's beyond saving, who spit on the very freedoms that let them sit here and attack it, maybe they should find a country they actually respect. The murmurs turned into a wave of reactions. Some reporters whispered intensely to each other. Others furiously typed away on their phones, undoubtedly sending out the first viral tweets. Caldwell was fuming. He had lost control of the debate. And worse, he knew it. Oh, so now you're the one deciding who's American enough to stay? He snapped. That's rich. Katherine raised an eyebrow. No, Mr. Caldwell, I don't decide that. But it's funny, you and your friends in the media never miss a chance to call conservatives fascists and bigots and dangerous extremists. Yet when you're asked a simple question, if America is so irredeemably broken, why stay? You lose your mind. Another shockwave. Some of the younger journalists in the back grinned, whispering to each other. Caldwell felt it. He was losing not just the debate, but the room. He clenched his jaw, scrambling for anything to turn the tide. So what's next, Katherine? He sneered. You gonna start kicking people out who don't agree with you? Send them to prison for disagreeing with the government. Katherine let out a quiet laugh. Not a nervous laugh, a knowing one. Mr. Caldwell, she said smoothly, You love pretending that standing up for America is the same thing as authoritarianism. But let me remind you, it's not conservatives who try to silence people. It's not conservatives who shut down free speech. It's not conservatives who dox, blacklist, and cancel anyone who doesn't toe the liberal line. Caldwell's face went rigid. Ironic, isn't it? Katherine continued, tilting her head. You lecture me about tolerance, yet the moment a conservative speaks their mind, you call them a threat. The room was on fire. Even the journalists who had started the press conference siding with Caldwell now seemed to be watching Katherine in a new light. Caldwell? He was breathing heavily now, cornered. And the worst part? He had walked straight into it. Nathan Caldwell was visibly shaken. The cool, smug journalist who had strutted into the press conference with a plan to humiliate Katherine Leavitt was now sputtering, scrambling, and losing control. And Katherine knew it. She stood tall at the podium, her expression calm and unshaken, while Caldwell's entire demeanor shifted. His face was flushed, his hands clenched at his sides. He knew this wasn't just another press briefing anymore. This was a war of ideas. And he was losing. Let's cut through the nonsense, Katherine said, her voice sharp but composed. You don't want an actual debate. You don't care about policy, facts, or reality. You care about power. Caldwell let out a forced laugh. Oh, please, spare me the conservative victim act. You're sitting here whining about free speech when you have an entire political machine behind you. Katherine raised an eyebrow. And yet here you are, a journalist, publicly attacking me without fear of being arrested or silenced. That's what makes America different. But in the countries you and your activist friends idolize places where the government does control speech, you'd never get away with what you do here. The audience stirred. Caldwell rolled his eyes, but his confidence was crumbling. Oh, right. Because questioning the government is the same as being a communist? Katherine smiled slightly. No, Mr. Caldwell, but pretending that America is some oppressive nightmare while enjoying every privilege it gives you is hypocrisy at its finest. The words hit hard. Caldwell's eyes flashed. He was losing, and he knew it. Let me tell you what's really happening here, he snapped, raising his voice. Conservatives like you want to gaslight the public into thinking that this country is some flawless utopia. You ignore racism, poverty, and inequality because it doesn't fit your narrative. Katherine's smile faded. She took a step forward, her voice lowering but gaining intensity. No, she said. What I ignore are the lies that people like you push to divide this country. What I reject is the victim mentality you sell to keep people dependent on the government. What I refuse to accept is this ridiculous idea that America is the enemy. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, looking around. For the first time, it felt like the room wasn't entirely on his side. And then, Katherine delivered the final blow. You have a choice, Mr. Caldwell, she said. You can either spend your life tearing this country down, or you can actually contribute something. But if you're going to stand here and call America a failure, an evil empire, a nation beyond redemption, then maybe, just maybe, you should take my advice. She leaned forward slightly. If you don't love the U.S., get out of here. Boom, the room erupted. Some journalists cheered. Others sat in stunned silence. Cameras flashed. Nathan Caldwell's face burned red. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Katherine stood tall, unmoved, unapologetic, and in that moment, everyone knew who had won. The room was electric. Reporters scrambled to file their stories. Cameras flashed non-stop, and social media was already on fire. Katherine Leavitt had done more than just win a debate. She had exposed the hypocrisy, challenged the narrative, and sent a message that millions of Americans had been waiting to hear. Nathan Caldwell. He didn't even try to respond. He simply gathered his notes, turned on his heel, and stormed out. Some reporters whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smirked, knowing they had just witnessed history. Katherine adjusted her microphone one last time. "This country isn't perfect," she said, her voice steady, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But it's worth fighting for. And some of us will never stop defending it." With that, she stepped away from the podium and exited the stage without looking back. The press room was left in stunned silence. And outside, the world was already reacting. The debate was over, but the impact had just begun. As Katherine Leavitt stepped away from the podium, the energy in the room lingered like an aftershock. Reporters whispered, some furiously typing, others shaking their heads, unsure of how to process what they had just witnessed. Outside, the real battle was beginning. Within hours, clips of the confrontation spread like wildfire. News channels replayed the exchange, political analysts weighed in, and social media erupted with reactions from both sides. Some called her words bold and necessary. Others called them divisive and dangerous. But through all the noise, one thing was clear. Katherine Leavitt hadn't just answered questions. She had drawn a line. She had challenged the narrative, refused to apologize, and left the world with a message that no one could ignore. And as the debate continued to rage far beyond that press room, she remained exactly as she had been from the start, unshaken, unapologetic, and stronger than ever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. What do you think? Was Katherine right to stand her ground, or did the journalist have a point? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.